1 minute ago. Princess Anne unveils the Queen's final will. Meghan, Andrew, and Harry left speechless. But what does it actually mean? The words had barely been spoken, yet the world had already begun to tremble beneath their weight. A sealed envelope, long hidden beneath the guarded corridors of Buckingham Palace, had just been opened, and standing at the center of this seismic moment, stoic, composed, and armed with the trust of a late monarch, was Princess Anne. The Queen's only daughter, the one who had quietly worked in the shadows for decades without seeking the limelight, was now the very person chosen to carry out Her Majesty's final wishes. Not a prime minister, not an archbishop, but Anne. And what she held wasn't just paper, it was power, legacy, truth. Across the room, seated at various distances, both emotional and literal, were Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and Prince Andrew. Three names that had ignited headlines, scandal, and speculation for years now, brought face to face with a final verdict from the woman they had each, in some way, challenged or disappointed. Meghan and Harry, estranged by distance and choice, once royalty and now outsiders. Prince Andrew, still reeling from disgrace and exile. And now, all three were about to learn exactly what Queen Elizabeth II had thought of their actions, their words, and their legacies. This wasn't just a will, it was a message from beyond the grave. And as the palace staff stood silent and the press outside held their breath, one question echoed louder than the rest. Why Princess Anne? Why now? And why had the Queen waited until her death to deliver her final blow or blessing? The monarchy has always lived and breathed on legacy, duty, and discretion. But today, the curtain has been pulled back just enough to reveal something raw, real, and unforgettable. Because in the royal world, where silence speaks, volumes and timing is everything, what's written in that document could change everything. Not just for the family, but for the future of the crown itself. To understand the shock, we need to know how royal wills really work. The British monarchy operates in a realm of secrecy, tradition, and carefully guarded legal mechanisms. A royal will isn't just a legal document, it's a living legacy, wrapped in centuries of protocol, unspoken alliances, and unbreakable discretion. Since the 1800s, British royal wills have been routinely sealed by the courts, protected from public access, and locked away from prying eyes. When Queen Elizabeth II passed, her final wishes weren't announced on television or published in newspapers. They were entrusted to a very specific inner circle, one bound by loyalty more than law. At the heart of this process stands the private secretary, who serves as the conduit between the crown and the government, and the executor appointed by the monarch to safeguard and carry out their dying instructions. Together, they form a closed circuit of power, bound to confidentiality. No reading of the will, no dramatic courtroom unveiling, just quiet, precise action. The Queen knew this, and she wielded it. But while commoners deal with probate courts and inheritance tax squabbles, the royals move differently. Their wealth, often intertwined with state assets and crown estates, isn't always theirs to give. The Queen couldn't hand Balmoral Castle to a grandchild or gift a priceless crown jewel to Meghan. These items belong to the institution, not the individual. What she could give, however, were personal heirlooms, deeply symbolic artifacts, private letters, and gestures that speak louder than any legal term ever could. There are whispers that the Queen had, over the years, quietly amended her will through codicils, those silent add-ons that adjust key details without rewriting everything. Each time a family scandal broke, each time trust shifted or someone walked away, many believe the Queen revisited her intentions. This wasn't about revenge, it was about preservation. A monarch thinking 5 steps ahead, ensuring that her legacy wouldn't just survive but speak, even when she no longer could. And then there's the matter of leaks. Though royal wills are sealed, the world finds ways to know. Former aides, disgruntled insiders, hints dropped by journalists too seasoned to name sources. And when one name is left out or unexpectedly included, speculation explodes. Did Meghan receive anything at all? Did Andrew's disgraces cost him more than titles? Is Harry's name mentioned with warmth or warning? The Queen never said a word, but her silence had been broken. And now, the weight of these centuries-old secrets falls on one woman's shoulders. Now, let's shine a spotlight on the executor herself, the steadfast Princess Anne. For decades, Princess Anne has operated like a ghost of duty everywhere and nowhere all at once. She's the one royal who has never needed headlines to prove her worth. No scandals, no Netflix specials, No bombshell interviews, just relentless service, an iron will, and a deep, unwavering loyalty to her mother, Queen Elizabeth II. She has carried more royal engagements in a single year than any other member of the family, often without photographers, often without applause. But that's the way Anne has always liked it. And that's precisely why the Queen trusted her above all else. From the moment she was born, Anne was forged in a different mold. As the only daughter of a reigning monarch, she bore the burden of proximity without the promise of power. Yet instead of retreating into resentment, she transformed that reality into an unshakable purpose. She became the Princess Royal, a title earned through unrelenting commitment, not inherited grandeur. While others in the family chased privilege or lost themselves in personal crises, Anne remained fixed, constant, silent, but watching. Her relationship with Queen Elizabeth wasn't always loud or sentimental, but it was forged from steel. The Queen admired consistency above all, and Anne, unlike her brothers, never faltered in the storm. It was Anne who stood beside her mother in quiet moments of crisis. Anne who managed internal family tension with surgical precision. Anne who didn't flinch when others collapsed under pressure. Time and again, the Queen saw in her daughter something many overlooked: the capacity to carry the monarchy's darkest truths without cracking under their weight. That's why, when it came time to decide who would become the executor of her final will, a role requiring discretion, control, and unshakable loyalty, it wasn't Charles, or Camilla, or even William, it was Anne. Because this task wasn't ceremonial. It was loaded, strategic, and likely to ignite controversy the moment it touched Meghan, Harry, and Andrew. The Queen needed someone who would not be swayed by emotion, reputation, or revenge. She needed someone incorruptible. And while Anne hasn't said a word publicly about her appointment, her recent appearances have said enough. Reserved, but commanding. Polite, but unshakable. There's no question she knew this day was coming. And she has prepared for it with the same quiet precision that has defined her entire life. This isn't just Anne delivering a will, it's Anne delivering judgment, clarity, and perhaps even closure, in a family that has drifted dangerously close to self-destruction. Because when a royal family fractures, it needs a pillar to remain standing. Anne has been that pillar. And now, the world watches as she walks into the eye of the storm, holding the one document that could change everything. With that solidity, Anne steps into the family heir room where Meghan, Harry, and Andrew wait. What did Meghan, Harry, and Andrew have to gain or lose from this final will? In the quiet before the words were read, three figures sat cloaked in more than just royal lineage. They carried the weight of fractured bonds, public exile, and personal downfall. Meghan Markle, once welcomed as the breath of fresh air into the monarchy, had since become its most polarizing force. Alongside Prince Harry, her husband and the Queen's once-beloved grandson, she had stepped back from royal duties, traded palace corridors for California's hills, and publicly aired grievances that rocked Buckingham Palace to its core. Their departure, dubbed Megxit, was never just about leaving. It was about breaking free from an institution they described as cold, calculating, and unforgiving. But now, as Princess Anne prepared to reveal Queen Elizabeth's final wishes, the pair faced a truth more powerful than any interview. Would the Queen forgive their rebellion or punish it from beyond the grave? The stakes were never financial alone. While royal wealth is vast, most of it is tied to the crown, not individuals. What remained were the Queen's personal assets, her jewels, her letters, her private properties, and, more importantly, her symbolic choices. A single necklace bequeathed to Meghan could speak volumes. A letter addressed to Harry could say more than any press statement ever could. But inclusion in the Queen's final testament wasn't guaranteed. And for two people who had redefined distance from the family, being left out entirely could be its own devastating form of closure. Then there was Prince Andrew. Once the Queen's favorite son, now the monarchy's greatest embarrassment. His involvement in the Epstein scandal, followed by a disastrous interview, legal settlements, and removal from public duties, had left him disgraced and adrift. But unlike Meghan and Harry, Andrew had never left the royal fold. He had been removed. And yet, he remained close to the Queen in her final days. Would that loyalty, however flawed, be rewarded? Or would the Queen draw a hard line, using her will to affirm the crown's distance from his shame? The emotional stakes were staggering. Inclusion meant redemption, forgiveness, a bridge home. Exclusion meant the opposite: rejection, sealed in ink, irreversible and brutal. and the public knew it. Commentators speculate wildly. Tabloids screamed theories. Would Harry be acknowledged as the Queen's grandson, or punished as the palace's rebel? Would Meghan receive anything, or would her name be absent altogether? Would Andrew's title as a son outweigh the scandal that swallowed him? But beneath the headlines, each of them must have wondered the same thing. Did the Queen still see them as family? Or had their choices, public, painful, unforgivable, rewritten their place in history? The monarchy had seen similar fractures before, from Edward VIII's abdication to Princess Margaret's romantic sacrifices. But rarely had a will been the battlefield. Rarely had so much emotion, symbolism, and legacy been reduced to a final list of names and gifts. This was no longer just a private family matter. This was a reckoning one that would reveal not only how Queen Elizabeth II viewed those who defied her, but also how she intended her legacy to outlive them all. In a monarchy built on silence and ceremony, the Queen's will was never going to be loud. But make no mistake, every word on those pages carried thunder. It wasn't the length of the document that stunned the palace. It was the weight of what it said, and what it chose to leave unsaid. Because buried between formalities and flourishes were names that mattered, items that mattered, choices that told a story more powerful than any public statement ever could. This wasn't just a legal transaction, it was a map of loyalty, regret, memory, and control. The known bequests began with what many expected. Trusts secured for her great-grandchildren, George, Charlotte, and Louis, meant to protect the next generation of the crown. These weren't merely financial cushions, they were affirmations of the Queen's confidence in William and Catherine's path forward. Balmoral, long whispered to be her favorite residence, was confirmed to remain within the direct line of succession. The Sandringham estate, though privately owned, was legally shielded to ensure it would never fall into outside hands. And then came the personal items. Her sapphire engagement brooch not to Camilla, not to Charles, but to Princess Charlotte. A statement so quiet and yet so deafening, it caused a media storm overnight. But where the document whispered affection, it also roared in omission. No direct monetary gifts to Prince Andrew, not a single named heirloom, just a vague line referencing all remaining family assets to be governed by discretion of the crown. In legal language, it seemed harmless. But within the family, it was a scalpel, a clean cut. His name, though not erased, was deliberately bypassed. After everything, the lawsuits, the fallout, the embarrassment, the Queen had drawn her line. There would be no public humiliation, no spectacle of condemnation, just absence. Cold, pointed, undeniable. Then came Harry and Meghan. The document didn't vilify them, but neither did it embrace them. A letter, allegedly written in the Queen's own hand, was said to have been included. Not legally binding, not publicly released, but reportedly filled with maternal concern and final thoughts particularly for Harry. No jewelry was named for Meghan, no properties, not even the rumored pearls once gifted early in her marriage. Instead, the Queen left an open clause. Let such items as I have personally designated be delivered through the discretion of the executor. And so, once again, it fell to Princess Anne to interpret legacy. The symbolism was staggering. The Queen had chosen to communicate, not just through what she gave, but what she withheld. A private painting gifted to Anne, a box of handwritten letters intended for archival preservation, not family hands. A set of diamond earrings passed to Lady Louise Windsor, Edward's daughter, almost entirely bypassing the more public figures. There was a logic to it, yes, but also a warning. Status doesn't equal sentiment. Titles don't guarantee trust. And legacy cannot be rewritten by public opinion or popularity. For all its elegance, this will read like a final act of control. Queen Elizabeth II had spent a lifetime navigating storms, surviving scandals, and holding together a family that threatened more than once to collapse from within. In her final document, she made one last effort to steady the ship, protect the institution, guard the future, and above all, signal clearly who she believed had stood with her and who had walked away. The media called it brutal. Some insiders called it healing. But those who knew her best saw something else. This was the Queen speaking her truth, the only way she ever truly could. In silence, in structure, and in absolute authority. Did Anne deliver it with royal fanfare, or was it leaked under pressure? That's the question that set the media on fire and sent royal watchers into a frenzy. Because in a monarchy where every whisper is measured and every glance choreographed, the release of Queen Elizabeth's final will was anything but ordinary. Traditionally, royal wills are handled with ironclad secrecy. Executors are expected to protect the sanctity of the document, avoiding leaks at all costs. No cameras, no press statements. Just quiet, procedural handoffs behind closed palace doors. But this time, the silence cracked, and the world heard it. The Queen passed on the 8th of September, 2022. Yet for months, there was no formal acknowledgement that her personal will had even been opened. Buckingham Palace remained tight-lipped. Princess Anne, named executor, carried on with royal duties as if nothing had changed. But behind the walls of Windsor and Sandringham, the wheels had already begun turning. Insiders now believe Anne received the sealed will mere days after her mother's funeral. What happened next has been described as highly unusual by royal historians. Because instead of the usual legal chain of custody, the contents, or at least the most controversial parts, found their way into the hands of journalists. No official statement was issued, no formal reading. Instead, headlines began to surface. First, subtle rumors in tabloid corners. Then, explosive exposés in major outlets claiming inside sources had confirmed what was in, or more importantly, what was not in the Queen's will. And while the palace remained silent, the damage was already done. Public trust fractured. Speculation exploded. Videos analyzing Anne's body language during recent public events garnered millions of views overnight. Was her expression heavy because of the burden she carried? Was the will being used as a quiet reprimand or a forced confession? Even the royal staff couldn't agree. Some pointed fingers at the press office, suggesting controlled leaks were used to shape the narrative. Others whispered of frustrated aides who felt the truth was being buried beneath protocol. What's undeniable is that the palace, for all its expertise in containment, lost control of the moment. And Princess Anne, who had been chosen specifically because she could be trusted to uphold her mother's final wishes without drama, was suddenly at the center of it all. Whether it was leaked or delivered intentionally, one thing became clear. The Queen's final words had not landed softly. They had pierced through the veil of monarchy and landed with a force no one expected. She already made an impact, but what happens next? The moment Queen Elizabeth's will began to leak, it was no longer just a royal document, it became a global spectacle. Within hours, UK tabloids ignited with headlines designed to provoke, shock, and divide. "Harry cut out," screamed one. "Meghan snubbed again," roared another. Across front pages and digital banners, the story wasn't about a monarch's last wishes. It was about perceived betrayals, secret favors, and long-simmering tensions finally exploding into public view. British media, especially those aligned with conservative royalist sentiment, framed the will as a final act of loyalty to the crown and a decisive rejection of those who challenged it. But the international response was far more conflicted. American outlets approached the matter with caution, often highlighting the emotional gravity of the Queen's choices. CNN and the New York Times ran headlines emphasizing the strained dynamics, questioning whether personal relationships or public optics had shaped the Queen's decisions. Meanwhile, royal commentators on international talk shows debated whether this was a case of quiet justice or thinly veiled retribution. The framing varied, but the fascination was universal. Everyone, it seemed, had an opinion. And then came the digital wildfire. On platforms like X, TikTok, and Instagram, the hashtag number Royal Will began trending within minutes. Memes of Princess Anne as the enforcer circulated alongside impassioned threads analyzing every rumored detail of the will. Users debated whether Meghan's exclusion was a deliberate slight or a mere legal technicality. Others posted side-by-side comparisons of past royal inheritances, drawing lines between who had been embraced by the institution and who had been erased from its narrative. The public sentiment wasn't one-sided. Some praised the Queen's decision to protect the monarchy. Others mourned what they called the final blow to family unity. But beyond public opinion, a deeper conversation emerged, one far more dangerous for the monarchy's future. Politicians began weighing in, some subtly, others more aggressively. Critics of the royal family used the will as ammunition to question the institution's relevance. If the monarchy can afford to distribute personal wealth in secret, one MP asked, why can't the public know how their taxes support it? Discussions of inheritance tax, which royals are largely exempt from, flooded parliament debates and op-ed pages. Suddenly, the Queen's final act wasn't just a family affair. It was a political flashpoint. Royal biographers found themselves caught in the storm. Some defended the Queen's intentions, painting them as part of a long strategy to preserve the monarchy's future in the hands of those who embraced duty over drama. Others expressed shock at the symbolic cruelty of certain exclusions. This wasn't about jewels, one royal analyst noted. This was about legacy and who gets to inherit it. Even beyond Britain, the ripple effect reached the Commonwealth. In Canada, Australia, and the Caribbean, where Republican movements have been gaining traction, the will added fuel to long-burning fires. Some called it elitist. Others questioned whether loyalty to a monarchy so steeped in secrecy could still be justified in a modern democracy. The optics, they argued, were damning. The timing, dangerous. But perhaps the most chilling takeaway was what the Queen didn't say. What was left out, what was sealed behind layers of tradition and discretion. Because while the world argued over what was revealed, many began to wonder what remained buried. How many more decisions had been made behind closed doors? And who would be the next to suffer or benefit in silence? Amid the noise, what does this mean for Britain and the monarchy as an institution? Every royal scandal shapes the crown's future. This one could be a turning point. For centuries, the British monarchy has survived by mastering the art of adaptation without appearing to change. But the Queen's final will, whether intended or not, has forced a reckoning. The age of quiet dignity is colliding with an era of digital transparency. And now, the royal family stands at a crossroads. The secrecy that once shielded them is now being weaponized against them. Critics call it elitism. Supporters call it preservation. But one thing is certain: the public is no longer content with shadows. And the fallout from this revelation could be the spark that reshapes how the monarchy is seen not just in Britain, but across the world. The monarchy's image has always hinged on control. Controlled access, controlled emotion, controlled disclosure. But this will, its contents, its leak, its symbolism, has punctured that veil. The people have questions. Why were certain individuals cut out? Why were others elevated? And more importantly, why was this document allowed to remain sealed while its consequences ripple through society like a quiet thunderstorm? The image of a compassionate, unifying institution has taken a blow. And while senior working royals like William and Catherine continue to carry out duties with grace, even their reputations are now entangled in the consequences of decisions they didn't make, but now must defend. Within the family itself, fractures once thought healed are showing again. The Queen may have aimed for peace, but her will revealed long-standing tensions that even death couldn't bury. The authority of the remaining core, Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine, and especially Anne, will now be tested not just by their ability to perform royal duties, but by how they manage perception, repair broken ties, and explain inherited silences. Can unity be restored when the last voice of restraint, Queen Elizabeth, has spoken her final word and walked off the stage? But perhaps the most significant observers are not the press or the public, but the next generation. George, Charlotte, Louis, even Archie and Lilibet, growing up across an ocean, will one day read the headlines, and they will ask questions about legacy, about justice, about inclusion. They are the ones who will inherit not just the crown's jewels, but its burdens. And they will look back on moments like these as lessons in leadership or cautionary tales of division. History isn't silent on such matters. This isn't the first royal will to ignite controversy. Queen Victoria's children fought over inheritance. Edward VIII's abdication nearly broke the line of succession, and Princess Margaret's final wishes left behind whispers of strained sibling rivalry. But never before has a will been unveiled in such a modern, media-saturated world. Never before has every decision been dissected in real time, across platforms, continents, and cultural divides. The crown no longer whispers to its people. It's shouted through headlines, debated on podcasts, and reposted in fragments of truth and fiction alike. The pressure for reform is growing. Some MPs now argue for an overhaul of royal inheritance protocols, demanding transparency and public accountability for what remains private wealth. Others push to separate personal estate matters from institutional power entirely. And while the monarchy has resisted change before, there is a growing realization that clinging to secrecy may only hasten its decline. If trust is the foundation of royal continuity, then secrecy is now the crack in that very stone. Still, in all this chaos, there lies an opportunity. A chance for the monarchy to evolve, to reconcile its ancient rituals with modern values, to recognize that being royal in the 21st century means being seen, understood, and, at times, questioned. The Queen's final will may have stirred ghosts, but it also unveiled truths that can no longer be hidden. Truths that must be addressed not with denial, but with courage. With that in mind, let's weigh the personal before the public. Beyond palace walls, this story is about people's loss, memory, and legacy. When Princess Anne stepped forward to read the Queen's final instructions, something shifted not in protocol, not in power, but in emotion. For all the headlines and speculation, the moment itself was intimate, raw, stripped of titles and formality. It was a daughter delivering her mother's final words to a fractured family she had spent her entire life trying to hold together. Those who know Anne say there was a tremble in her voice, subtle but unmistakable, a rare flicker of vulnerability from the woman known as the monarchy's iron spine. In that fleeting pause, the nation caught a glimpse not of royalty, but of grief, of duty laced with heartbreak. Behind her, the silence of the room said more than any document could. Meghan and Harry, thousands of miles away, were reportedly informed by an intermediary, not personally, not directly. For a couple who once stood at the heart of the family, the distance was no longer just geographic. It was emotional, generational, and perhaps irreversible. And yet, one can imagine the weight of it, the ache of not knowing what was written, the sting of wondering if forgiveness had been buried with the Queen. If a door had finally closed, Prince Andrew, by contrast, sat in the shadows of scandal. Whatever emotions stirred in his remorse, resentment, or regret were not shared. But even in disgrace, he is still a son, and for a fleeting moment, even his presence in the room reminded the world that no amount of royal structure can erase the complicated bonds of blood and legacy. Yet amid the sorrow and the spectacle, something deeply human unfolded. The Queen's passing reminded people everywhere of their own losses, their own family tensions, their own longing for reconciliation. It struck a nerve beyond Buckingham's gates. People saw themselves in the grief, the silence, the hopes left unspoken. They weren't just watching the crown, they were watching a family mourn, divide, and try, in some quiet way, to heal. And now, to wrap up what this moment truly tells us about monarchy today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.